Welcome to Pine Island Research Monday night. Um, Operating under a little bit different MO. And just to give you an idea, that means we are not live on YouTube tonight. We are broadcasting live on Facebook, on our Twitter feed, and we'll be uploading to all the podcast platforms. It doesn't mean that we have quit YouTube. It simply means somebody on our network said something that YouTube felt they didn't like. And so they told us for a few days we couldn't upload our shows live there. We have appealed it. It sounds like we've won the appeal. It just hasn't gone through yet and been processed. So sometime over the next couple of days, all the shows that Untold has been doing, this morning's coffee time show, all that will be shot up and available on our channel on YouTube. But right now, tonight, you need to watch us on Facebook or Twitter. And I see John Ayers and a couple others are popping in. We got 7 or 8 people watching right now. Appreciate your support. It's unfortunate, but it happens, I guess. This is really, I don't want to go into the description in detail of what happened, but, it involves somebody who, with our channel, was not feeling well for a week and a half, was diagnosed with something, and they simply talked about what they were diagnosed with and said a week and a half later, now they feel better. And that alone was enough. So it's unfortunate, but hey, life will go on here. Had a really big show planned tonight that we will be doing next week on Monday, where tonight's guest on tonight's show will be a part of that panel next week. It's going to be an interesting discussion, but I thought it would be fun to have Joe on tonight, simply because Joe, like myself, has had an encounter, and I've heard his encounter shared over and over and over, and it's same with him hearing mine in different channels, different opportunities where people have asked us to talk about them. We've shared them. Neither of us have been shy about sharing with others what we experienced. Joe is great at describing what happened. He uses great descriptives. It makes it feel like you're standing next to him when he talks about what happened to him that day. But one of the things we wanted to discuss tonight is, what are the common descriptives that we hear in people's encounters? What are the things that we start drawing to when it comes to reference and saying, I've heard that before, or this seems to be a common theme here? And what are some of the things that we've heard in the area of descriptives for somebody's encounter that seemed more kind of isolated, that you don't hear about often? We're going to talk a little bit about the idea of Class A visual encounters versus Class B audible encounters. So should be a fun discussion. If you're all watching us on Facebook, feel free to type in a comment. We can see them here on StreamYard as we're doing the show. But we appreciate it for those of you who are taking your Monday night and spending it with us. It's awesome to have you here. Joe, how's it going, buddy?
All right, man. It's going pretty good.
If you're not feeling well right now, do not tell me what is ailing you, because
well, I'm fine. I'm
who knows what might happen, right?
I'm not ailing, but
I don't get it. I don't get where some of these TOS rules that we follow, are applied seemingly differently to different channels. And,
well, I don't have the snarfly garfle or anything like that. So,
well, like I say, the interesting thing about this was the person who said this was simply just saying, I was sick, saw my doctor, diagnosed me with blank. So been a week and a half. I felt a little crappy. I feel better now. And that was it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost like if I went and said, I saw my doctor And he said I had a cracked rib, but they gave me some painkillers, said just it'll heal on its own. Would I get a TOS violation? I mean, we're talking about a doctor who's diagnosed me with something. We're not, there's
Right.
nothing seemingly provocative about about that
Right. Yeah.
conversation. So
Yeah.
just seemed odd. But anyways, I'm glad to have you on. But
That's
I'm
good to
looking
hear.
forward to our discussion next week on Monday. It should be a great discussion. Got
Got a
kind
good
of an
ball lined
all-star
up.
panel lined up for it.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
going to have Steve Coles and Thomas Steenberg and Leon Thompson and yourself. And, it'll
Eric.
be a fun conversation. Eric
Yeah.
from Media Palace.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to have an interesting something to add, but it'll be a great conversation. And we will be ultra careful not to skirt the edges that may be considered offensive by some of the platforms out there, one in
Yeah.
particular. But, anyways, we were talking this afternoon about show topics, and this is just something that I think me and you have had conversations on just naturally when we're chatting about
Yeah.
things. Um,
Here and there.
the
Yeah.
descriptives people seem to use when they're talking about their people who've had an encounter.
Yeah, and I mean, in particular, and like I said, I've voiced this before when we're talking about different things that you're seeing online and et cetera. And I will always be, even though I've pushed and am pushing with the evolution I've gone through, that I'm the kind of guy that I understand why people need evidence. Not everybody, but many people. But when it comes to encounters, I'm still the kind of guy that um, I still like listening to people's encounters, right?
Sure.
Whether I end up believing that person or not is beside the point. I still like listening to them because of the fact that I've had my own encounter. And I mean, that's pretty much all I have in this whole game is I have something that happened to me that I've encountered.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm always still the kind of guy that likes to listen because extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, right? We all know this.
Mm-hmm.
Part of Hitchens'
Mm-hmm.
razor, blah blah blah. And it's pretty extraordinary when you find out that there's something out there that you thought, well, it could be out there. Not sure if it's out there, but
Yeah.
then all of a sudden you encounter it and you go, holy crap, it really is out here. And
You
so,
kind of end up in a position where most people, whether they believe or don't believe in Bigfoot, it's based on a choice that they've made over time. And once you've had an encounter, you kind of by default don't have a choice in the matter
yeah,
anymore.
yeah. And I listen to encounters because of what you said. I go into every encounter not listening to whether the person, whether I'm going to believe the person. I go into the encounter listening for certain descriptives, like you said, because I find it very interesting. I want to see how many other people out there describe something the same way or very similar to what I encountered, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, and yes, I will admit that when they do, that goes a long ways for me for my own self going, wow, this person really did see what they're saying they saw because I saw it too.
It's
In
funny
particular,
how some of the smallest details in somebody sharing an encounter can actually be the thing that makes you really put a lot of stock into what you're hearing. It
absolutely.
isn't really the gigantic details. It's something little that they'll say that you can relate to, or you've heard, you've experienced, or was similar to something that you've experienced. And just the fact that they included that and described it the way they did, to other people, maybe it's not a big element, but to you, it's like, man, there's
Yeah,
something here. I mean,
yeah,
he has touched on something
yeah,
that to me is puts a high degree of validity to
Yeah.
this, you know.
Well, it's especially if it's somebody like, in my case, I heard an encounter story. I don't remember where, but it was on some on one of the channels that this guy was describing when, again, seems to happen when they're young, right? 18, 19 years old. They were out. He's telling the story many years afterwards. Now, I don't know this guy from Adam. He's never heard of me. And within the description of what they saw, number one, which struck me, was that the distance that they viewed this thing from was about at the same distance that happened with my encounter. The other things that when he started describing this creature, other than the color of the hair, I went, "Holy shit! This guy just kind of described Rasta."
Yeah.
And that guy doesn't know me, probably never heard of me. Now, yeah, there could be an instance where you could say, well, maybe they heard your story and they just adopt. Well, I think the chances of that are very slim when it comes to something like that. You know, this is not somebody that knows who I am, has ever heard my story, and then just decided to tell one. In
Yeah.
fact, I'm not even sure when this particular airing happened or whatever, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
This may have happened to him long before well, obviously it happened long before my encounter with Rasta.
Sure.
So,
Whether or not he
so
chose
that
to
went into it.
share
I
it
went, holy
is a
shit,
different
man.
story.
There are people, because you hear so many other different descriptions sometimes, and I think sometimes people describe them so differently, not because maybe that they are different, which I think some of them, of course, obviously different ones look different. But I think sometimes if you come into radical differences in description, I think it's sometimes it may be that because the person doesn't exactly know what they're looking at, their brain fills in some things.
Yeah.
But this particular encounter, just it to me. I walked away from it going, well, I believe that this exactly is happened the way it was described in this encounter, and that's no photos, no, same position I'm in. Got no way to prove that it really did happen,
Yeah.
but it convinced me enough, you know.
I think there's
Um,
two things that exist greatly different in different people. And that's one is the skill of recollection,
mhm,
being able to remember things that are happening to you, especially things under duress. You can watch any one of these live PD type shows that are on that follow law enforcement as they stop. You know, they'll show up at the scene of an accident or where there was a domestic dispute, and they'll ask the person, "Tell me what happened," right? Some of them are fairly calm and the descriptives, and they tell them everything that happened. I mean, and others are so caught up in the moment they can't. They're just barely skimming what happened, you know. And so that skill of recollection, obviously, especially under duress, is different for everybody. The other
right,
thing that exists that's greatly different for everybody is the ability to communicate, the
true.
ability to
Articulate.
use the descriptives and use the tell you what this was like and what this felt like and what it
Mhm,
was, you know. And you could hear two different people share the exact same encounter, and one of them just feels like, wow, I like I explained about your encounter, I feel like I'm standing next to this person the way they're explaining it, right?
yeah.
So with those two things that varying differently with everybody, some are great at recollection and some are bad at it. Some are great at communicating and explaining things that have happened, and some just aren't that great at it. Then you factor in everybody handles duress differently. And so I think when you start, like you had mentioned, some of these descriptives, when they get really off the beaten path of what you are normally hearing about physical traits and
Mhm.
things like that, I think you got to start wondering at some point there. is it the inability to accurately describe something, or is it
Right.
the inability to accurately recall something?
Right. It's not that they're making it up or they
No,
didn't, you know,
no,
it's maybe they just don't know how to articulate,
absolutely.
you know. I mean, you got to take that into consideration. It's just like, people that, you know, when it comes to an encounter, like I don't ever like know that didn't happen to you, even if I don't believe it, right?
Hmm.
I'm not going to say that didn't happen to you because I cannot do that because I was not there. So if somebody says to me and describes, well, I had an encounter, he was, it was X amount of feet away from me. This is what I saw. This is what it looked like. Okay, all that's fine and well, and I'm with you on that. Great. And then it's like, and then I heard this voice in my head saying, "Don't be like." They go into the mind speak thing. Okay,
Hmm.
right there, you've probably lost me. Even though maybe you did experience that. I'm not saying that that's not something you think that you experienced, but that doesn't prove to me that Bigfoot mind speaks, right?
Sure,
Um,
sure. I
but
think
the
I think
encounter itself, I'm gonna look at your description first off, and I'm gonna be looking for me myself, and this is just for me. I'm going to be looking for in your description anything that sounds similar or familiar to
sure.
what I encountered. You
Yeah,
know,
I think you're describing is you the default that you start out in hearing anybody share an encounter story is looking for the relatable things, looking for the things that prop up the validity of what I'm hearing.
right,
Once you hear something that doesn't really go along with what you're used to or what you're familiar with, you don't throw it away at that point.
right, right,
But maybe you start looking for other things that you're not familiar with. Are there other, it's not always can we keep propping this up? Maybe it's I'm looking now for other things that seem to be pushing it down. And that's not saying mind speaks real or not real. That's not
right,
saying portals are real or not real, or
right,
any supernatural aspect to it is real or not real.
right,
All that's saying is that you're really looking to feel, because I'll tell you right now, there are people out there who may not have had anything like what they're describing you happen to them, but may be under the idea that this did happen to them for
oh,
whatever
absolutely,
reason.
right,
That they did experience what they're telling you,
right,
even if a lot of these details are different than what they experienced. They are perceiving that this happened to me,
hmm,
and
hmm,
the reasons for that, there's a whole spectrum of them, and I
right,
don't want to get into that because I'm not here to sound
yeah,
like
yeah,
we're down on somebody who shares something. Look, just because it hasn't happened to me does not mean that it couldn't have happened to you. That is
right,
my number one rule there. First,
right. Well, yeah, I mean, you have to be intellectually honest. You have to be able to take that into consideration.
sure,
Just because it didn't happen to me doesn't mean that somebody else didn't experience something. Everybody
sure,
experiences different things.
sure,
And, when it comes to those experiences, the only thing I can do when I'm listening is to reach out and find commonalities,
sure.
because, when it comes down to it, does it matter whether I believe somebody's encounter or not? No. Just like it doesn't matter to me if somebody believes me or not.
Sure. Yeah.
Um,
But let
but
me
what,
ask you this. You've been to the event in Whitehall, the
mhm,
convention or the Bigfoot event there. You've been there when you went there with Steve Coles and Jeff Meldrum was there speaking.
mhm.
And you had an opportunity not just to hear those guys speak, but wouldn't you say the highlight of an event like that is when you're sitting around somebody's merch table for 6 hours and it's all these other people that are coming up saying, let me share with you what happened to me.
Sure.
I mean, it's to me, if I'm at a convention, it's not about sharing what happened to me for 45 minutes or hearing, nothing against Cliff and Bobo and all those guys that you're going to see at these conventions.
Right.
I love listening to those guys too.
Right.
But the highlight for me that I could do all day long, day after day, is listen to people line up and say, I want to share with you what happened to me.
Absolutely.
I'm cracking a beer going, let's go. I don't care if the guy comes up and says, let me tell you about my dogman encounter. I have a hard time relating to that. I don't find the flesh and blood slot that fits in, which is where I start with my research of looking at anything.
Right.
But that doesn't mean I don't want to listen to them. I
Hey,
want to
everybody loves
listen
a
to
good
what you have
story
to
no matter
say.
what, right? Everybody loves a good story no matter
Right?
what.
Yeah. And
Look,
quite
there,
honestly, we learn a lot taking the time to listen to people's encounters,
yeah,
whether we're learning about the encounter or something that they experienced, or we're learning about their body language and things like that. I mean, there is so much to gain knowledge wise, letting yourself listen to others.
and well, and a bit of it, I have to admit, a bit of it is also goes towards validating my own thoughts to me and knowing that okay, I'm being validated here, or I have a feeling of validation because I'm not the only one describing this thing, right? I'm not the only one that's describing it this way. So that almost brings the realness of it, even though it's very real to me, always will be. Um, but that even just brings it even more closer to home, is that. So, there is a part of that in there too.
I
Now,
could listen to somebody share an encounter, and there's elements of it that I'm just feeling to myself, wow, I've never heard that before. I don't have a reference point for that. This seems strange to me. It doesn't mean I'm putting more stock into believing or not believing this
right,
person. It's just
right,
we're going into uncharted territory. We're making some history here in my mind in my library of reference.
yeah,
But then all of a sudden in the middle of that, you'll hear them use a descriptive like when I looked at it, its mouth hung open or its lip looked kind of lazily like hanging open. Something small like that, I'll be like, wow, that's
yeah,
exactly what I saw, right?
right,
I have no connection to all the other things that I wasn't familiar with. You just hit on something that I seen and experienced, and I thought compared to what I hear from everybody else, isn't something that's common.
right,
Now you said
right,
it, and it's like, whoa,
right, right. Well,
So
right, just back to that same one, man. That encounter that I was listening to, that guy was talking about, him and two of his other friends saw this thing standing across a creek, man. When he described what he saw, I mean, it was so eerie that I was like, right down to the hair, the way the hair was hanging on its head,
Mhm.
the length of the hair. Like I said, the only thing that was really different was the color. He described it as being kind of a orangish, brownish kind of color, right? A sandy kind of color hair.
Mhm.
Instead of like Rasta was, all I could say was black. Is so the hair was so dark.
Sure.
But other than that, every other description, even the size of the thing, roughly was about the same size as Rasta. And so, I mean, I found that amazing, and I'm like, holy crap, dude, really? So, but when it comes, and I mean, when it comes right down to it, all encounters, mine, yours, Jay's, anybody's, it's all pretty subjective, right?
Sure.
But that doesn't mean that, generally, and in general, I feel that if somebody is going to approach me to tell me about an encounter or talk about something they think they might have experienced or something, they're doing it because they need somebody to hear it that might believe them.
Sure.
Not
Sure.
that they're coming up to me to go, hey, look at the Bigfoot guy. I'm going to tell him a story and just
Yeah.
totally blow smoke up his ass and see if he believes me. I don't think that. Today I met a lady and it was very simple. And it's all because of my Jeep decked out with the official
Yeah.
Bigfoot search vehicle shit on it.
If anybody sees you in your Jeep, they have to wonder or not
Yeah.
if you're okay to talk about Bigfoot.
Right, right. So, and often the conversation always starts the same. Twice today, I've had two different conversations start with two different people, and they both started the same way, which was, "Do you really hunt them?" And
Yeah,
that opens up the
because it says,
conversation, right? So
uh,
I told this lady, she started out, and this was when I was doing the delivery. I was walking back out to my Jeep, and she was in her car, and she rolled down her window, and that's how it started. "Do you really hunt them?" And I said, "Well, hunting is not really the right description." And she was like, "Oh no, but have you look for?" I was like, "Absolutely." And so, but the word she used, now she originally, and this I found very interesting. She said, "Have you seen a Yeti?" And it caught me aback for a second, and I went, Yeti." I was like, And when I went, she went, "Well, Bigfoot." And I said, "Actually, yes." And I told her just briefly. I said, "Yeah, I saw one uh, about 3 years ago in 2020 out in Allegheny County." And she said, "On this continent?" And this was an older lady too. Now you got to understand. She said, "On this continent? Wow." She said, "I saw." She saw. She told me that she saw a Yeti in the Himalayas
mm,
when she was in Nepal. And now she didn't go into any great detail, but when she said that she saw a Yeti, you know what? I believe that lady. I believe she saw a Yeti in Nepal. Um,
well, you got to kind of
she had
ask
no
yourself
reason
if
to
her MO
have,
was to come up and make this
or at
up to
least,
you.
at least she believes she saw one. I can say that for a fact. She believes she saw one, and she would have no reason to tell me that whatsoever. But so I'm like, yeah, wow, it's not a far stretch for me to go. I think that lady, yeah, she probably did encounter something she thought was a Yeti. Maybe it was. I don't know. But she owns it. And that's the thing. Leon says that a lot. It's not about whether the person you're trying to tell whether the person's telling the truth or making up a lie. You want to see if they own what they're saying to you.
Yeah. You
And
brought
when
up
you can see
something
that they
earlier.
own what they're saying to you, you may not be able to go, "Well, they definitely saw a Bigfoot or they definitely encountered," but you can say they damn sure believe they experienced what they're telling me.
Yeah.
You
You
know,
brought up something earlier that there's a lot of truth that rings through to even if somebody was sharing with you something that isn't true. Their reasoning for doing it could be a lot of different things. Me and you have seen this firsthand. Me, you, and Steve Coles and a couple others were talking to a person who had brought this up, brought a kind of a vivid story up to us, making it seem as if he had an extraordinary experience and even had proof, but didn't want to bring the proof forward and all this. And Brent Dill spent some time talking to him afterwards, after the conversation, found out, got him to admit he just wasn't true. And we come to discover this is a person who is really lonely. They're suffering some extreme depression and some self esteem stuff. And they felt like if they could have shared something that would have been accepted by a certain group of people, and perhaps they watched some of our shows and not to sound vain about it, but maybe they looked up to one of us or something, and just thought, hey man, if he could be my friend, this would be awesome. And they thought that's the way you would do that, is to
yeah,
make up something like this. And in the end, he kind of confessed, this is the reason why I did this. And I'll tell you, a person who may be sharing something with you that is not true, the last thing they need is for you to call them every name in the book and say they're a
right,
liar and else,
right.
because
Well, see, that's an
the
instance.
reason
If there are
that they're
people
doing it is that they're
looking
hurt.
for acceptance, man, and I can't fault anybody for wanting to be accepted by something, so I can understand that type of thing when it
Well,
comes
and it
to,
might go beyond that,
you know,
Joe. It might be
yeah,
that they're just hurt. They're hurting somehow.
mhm,
there's something that's absent in their life. They may be looking out the window and saying, I'm done, as they're drinking their cup of coffee. And later that day, they're sharing with you something. The last thing they need to hear is how they're a filthy liar and everything else. So I'm not saying you don't call out hoaxes. There are people that orchestrate hoaxes for the purpose of defrauding people, making money, profiting, all this stuff, right? Even the trolls, angle on it. But somebody who's doing what this individual was doing, that me and you had this experience with, this guy was hurting, man. And the last thing he would have needed is for us to just stomp him out.
Well, it was a forgivable thing
Yeah.
because it wasn't done out of malice. That's the thing. It wasn't done out of malice of any sort.
But moving past that now, I think one of the things that we start seeing that's similar in a lot of we had talked a little bit earlier about specifically Class B encounters. Okay.
Yeah.
There's
It's
something that we're starting to notice, right? When you go to BFRO's site and you look at, which by the way, BFRO, hundreds of investigators that over the years have looked into these, and these a
yeah.
lot of them are very good at what they do.
Hey,
Okay.
there's one in the chat right now that just popped up. Crystal Panic. She was with the BRO for quite a while as an investigator.
Yep. So one of the things that I would touch on is that when you see a Class A encounter, when they investigate them, they will not only the first part of what you read in that is their interview with the person, what the person claims.
Right.
They'll put some descriptives as
Oh,
to the weather, the
still am.
location. Yeah. And
She
but then
still is.
they'll follow it up with kind of their opinion on it, right? And with the Class A's, which are visual encounters, a lot of times you'll see in these opinions, I think there's a chance that this could have been a misidentification, or since they only saw it walking on its back legs for 2 to 3 seconds, perhaps the distance that they saw it at, they mistaken it for a Bigfoot, when maybe it could have been a bear.
Yeah.
You see all this different stuff, but what we see in the Class B's, it seems like, is they heard
Well,
a wood knock, they heard a
I've heard him.
howl, they heard a scream.
Yeah.
And I don't typically see in the Class B's, perhaps they heard a coyote that was caught in a trap, or perhaps they heard,
Yeah.
it just seems like we're so quick to attribute these Class B's to it must have been Bigfoot.
Yeah. Well, see, that's why I say, and I'm not, this is not a critique of their classification system or anything on my part. I have a problem with, now I understand Class A, you actually saw something. That's an encounter.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. For me, Class B means I heard a noise that I can't identify. That's doesn't really, to me, in my mind, doesn't qualify as an encounter, right?
And
Seems
when you
like
say I can't
there should
identify,
be another word to use for that because, I mean, technically, yeah, that's what a Class B is. I heard a weird noise I've never heard before, aka Bigfoot. And it's
yeah.
like, well, you don't know that, though. You don't know that you.
The key there, Joe, is when you say that I can't identify, I is different in every encounter. Okay. We're talking about
Absolutely.
people who have different thresholds of reference. Okay.
Right.
Meaning, for instance, I'm a part of a network of hunting guides. I've talked about this often. I've got guides that I refer business to and vice versa that spend, you know, 70, 80 days a year, fourth of the year in very remote areas of northern Idaho and Montana and things like that. And when they hear a vertebrate mammal type sound that they can identify, that's saying something. These guys have spent decades of their life out in these areas, and they know their reference that they would compare a sound to and the possible source of it is somewhat
Right.
vastly different than somebody who says, I camp 3 weekends a year
Yeah.
and I don't do much
But
out in the
you also have to agree that when it comes to that, with those kind of people, with that, even if they come to the I don't know what that is, they're not going to be like their final verdict on it was must be Bigfoot.
sure.
They're not going
And
to think
we're
they're
not
going to
even
go.
always
I don't know what that is, so I guess either I try to find out what it is, or
we're not just
come out
talking
and
about
say I don't know.
vocalizations
Right?
either. I mean, somebody that says I heard a tree knock. I mean, we're
That's not an
attributing
encounter.
any thump sound against a tree to Bigfoot. And it's like,
Well,
wait
that
a minute here.
to me, that's not an encounter. That's not even a Class B encounter. You heard a wood knock. That could be anything. That could be a tree exploding from cold. That could be,
Sure.
I mean, it could just be any number of things.
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
but so I mean, the differences between the Class A and the Class B. Yeah, it's like Class A, you have something there, right? You actually saw something. So there's more that you can it seems there's more that you can investigate and find out about that particular as opposed to, well, I heard this.
Well, there is more that you can investigate, but then also there's such a variance in Class A encounters that it almost feels like, even though we're using A and B, right? I mean, decades ago, that's how that system was set up.
Hmm.
Whether or not there's room to expand upon A or B. But you telling me that 250 feet out in the front edge of your headlights at 4 in the morning while you were driving 70 miles an hour for 1.3 seconds, you saw something walk upright across the highway versus your encounter or Jay's
Right,
encounter.
right, right,
Look, that's an A minus, and this other one's a plus.
right,
They
right.
aren't the same, right? They aren't
No,
the
they're
same.
not. Right, they're not the same. There's a difference between, like, if it was like uh like Thomas says, if he says, well, when he answers, if somebody says, "Have you ever seen one?" Thomas tells you, well, uh, if what I saw at the distance that he said he saw it at was a Bigfoot, then yes, I've seen one. If it was not, then no, I still haven't seen one
Mhm,
because
mhm,
that was quite a ways off.
mhm.
And so it's kind
Yeah,
of like that. It's a totally different thing than as if Thomas had seen that thing standing like 40 feet away from him.
sure.
You know,
And
so
you
yeah,
see that, you sense that when you read these encounters from the BFR. And I only use BFR as an example. They've got the most
because
established
they've got the
library of
one
encounters,
biggest.
right?
Yeah, they've got the
But
biggest
when you
database
read,
out there for
if
them.
you just went through and said, I'm just going to read Class A encounters over the last 12 months, and you went through and read them all, the variances of the distance and the dark versus daytime
Right,
and three people there versus one, and
right,
you start factoring in all these different variables in them, you start feeling like some of them are easier to attribute or vet a validity level to than others. And I'm not saying that means others aren't real. I'm just saying
right,
that, a guy who is a hunting guide or a guy who's a law enforcement officer saying, I saw it walking across a backyard from 50 feet away in my spotlight, is somebody who has a library of investigative skills that he deals with daily and analyzes what am I looking at, and versus somebody who says, when I was 11 years old, I remember seeing one walk by from across the lake.
right.
It's just like, whoa, there's a big difference in what's being shared here. But yet they're both Class A encounters. And
Sure.
that's why I kind of question, is there even a further step to classify
Right.
this than A or B? I not saying they should, not saying they shouldn't, but there definitely is a difference
Yeah.
in the descriptives and the circumstances of all of those.
Yeah. And even Crystal says, she's still a investigator for him. She says right there, not all reports are made public either.
Hmm.
Because I'm sure they get tons of them.
Oh,
Absolutely.
you know,
Because
people,
BFRO database for encounters and stuff like that, that's been out there for what now? How many years? It's been out there for quite a while.
long time.
And so, yeah, I'm absolutely sure that they get inundated with just reports. Some
Sure.
probably valid as hell. Others probably just people writing in see if they could pass something off. Right.
Well,
But that's
and
why
here's the
they have
other
these
thing.
investigators to be able to parse out. Okay, which of these sound plausible enough or worth the time to go actually investigate. Right.
And once you are there investigating it and you're talking to this, you might be the first human being this person's ever told this experience to. And when you start questioning them and they start kind of reliving the experience in their head, um, it may be a lot. There may be a lot going on with this person emotionally, PTSD related type scenarios to where in the middle of all this, they could just tell you, you know what, I've changed my mind. I don't want my story out there. And now, like Crystal said, that could be a story that's sitting in a file that happened, but not everybody's reading it.
Right.
And I could see where that could happen more often than you think it would, because it's a pretty traumatic thing for some of these people to share what's first of all,
And even though
if you've had an
Bigfoot's
encounter
way
like that,
mainstream, there's still the stigma. There's still the stigma attached to it
sure.
uh, about saying I saw a Bigfoot. There's still the stigma
Well,
that
there's
people
a
are afraid
stigma
of.
that exists on different levels. A lot of these people would not talk to a coworker or a relative or somebody that there's a lot of risk versus reward. I can handle a BFRO investigator coming and talking to me. If they don't believe me, I don't give a crap. I don't know this person. I'll never see this person again. Versus a coworker or your brother or somebody not
Right.
believing you. That's devastating.
Yeah.
And so that's why I say it's likely that a lot of times these investigators, when they're interviewing somebody, they're the first ones to ever hear about this experience because this person has decided I can share this with this person because they aren't going to judge me. I don't know them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Me and you, when we came out and shared our encounters publicly, we did so with the understanding that I don't care if you believe me or not.
Yeah.
Everybody's on their own journey. Everybody has a different threshold that they need to achieve before they attribute truth to something. And that's not just Bigfoot, that's God, that's money, that's anything, right?
Yeah.
So, if I share what happened with you, if it helps you, great. If whether or not you believe me, I really don't care. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't share it so that
Yeah.
I can chalk up all the believers on some
Yeah.
type of a scorecard. It's not I don't care about that.
Yeah. Well, and I'll firmly admit, I will firmly admit that the reason why I say if somebody doesn't believe me, I don't care. Because if somebody doesn't believe me, well, I don't have a leg to stand on. I don't have a way to make you believe me. So
Sure.
if I don't have a way to go, okay, here's the Bigfoot that I saw, you know, then if you don't believe me, fine. I don't care. I don't care.
That's
You
why
know,
that's why, Joe, an encounter.
because I understand why somebody wouldn't believe it. I mean, I've been there. I've seen it.
Sure.
It took me a while for my own self, actually, Jeff. I mean, of course, the first person I ever told was my wife, who still doesn't believe me to this day. I don't know why. Um, but, well, I do.
Well, I've
She
heard
was
her
just,
say
it's
100 times, Joe, she believes that
that
you
I
believe.
believe, yeah, which is at least something. But no, it took me a while. I had to think about it before I actually told my encounter online. I had to think, okay, look, I I know that people, lots of people aren't going to believe this. That's the first thing I said to myself when I made it to my Jeep after the encounter was nobody's going to believe this. So I had to wait before I ever even told mine online for the first time. I had to go through my head and weigh things, man. Like, what possible good is this going to do? Is this going to do any good, first of all, other than just to get it off my chest? And that's a valid thing. Don't get me wrong. But I had to consider things like that. Is this going to do any good? Since I don't really have any way to validate what I'm saying, is this going to really be any good to tell anybody? Right?
Yeah.
This is just some of the things. And I think some people also, and that's my point, is I think a lot of people with their reluctance sometimes, it may have somewhat to do with something like that as well. Like, well, okay, I did encounter it. Most people aren't going to believe it. So, what good am I doing by talking about it other than to relieve it off of myself, right? Which can be very freeing and very, healing if it was something traumatic to you.
Well,
So,
there's got to be an acknowledgement that anybody's encounter is simply data. Okay. The only person that it's
right.
proof to is the
The only
person
one with
who it
evidence to
happened
is
to.
yourself, right?
Yeah. So, when somebody says, well, I don't believe you, well, I can't prove what happened to me happened to me
Right.
to you, but it's proof to me. And it's what drives me to paddle 1,000 miles in a summer looking for data. It's what drives me to have conversations every Monday night with people to learn as much as I can from their experiences. It'd be a lot easier to just, trust me, take up golf or something if you really weren't really convicted to this deal through a personal experience. So, but like I say, that's one of the things we're going to talk about next Monday night is data versus evidence.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times that is wrongly portrayed and used in the conversations that we hear in this community. Data is something that I collect. For instance, good example of that, Tristan on my show the other night was sharing audio recordings that he said, I'm not saying this is Sasquatch. I don't know what it is. I'd love to hear what you think it is. Every one of those audio recordings was data. None of them were evidence.
Right. It's
They
not
aren't
evidence.
evidence of anything.
Yeah. And in that show next week, I think I might actually get into why, and I'm sure because I think a lot of people may have questions, or at least some people may have questions of how come I hold encounters, or somebody telling me how come I hold encounters to a different standard of evidence than I do
Sure.
other stuff, and there's a reason for that, and I'll get more into that
Mhm.
next week. There's a definite reason for it, and I think it's a reason everybody will understand too.
Yeah.
Why I hold a different level of what I'll accept as evidence when it comes to a counter as opposed to other stuff. You know.
Yeah. But, like I say, back to the whole wrongly using the word data and
Yeah.
evidence is when people talk about, evidence works to prove something. Okay. So
Mhm.
when people say, you see this all the
Or to
time in
indicate that
in
something is more likely over something else.
sure. My
Right.
point is the shock value that we see in a lot of the titles on different channels, right?
Hmm.
Evidence that Bigfoot exists, or proof. I proof that this is whatever. It's simply data. It's a picture.
Right.
It's a video. It's audio recording. It's data to be considered.
Right.
It not unless you've got a body in the back of your pickup truck or lab results from the DNA that you extracted from something that maps that we're not looking at a known vertebrae,
Right.
you don't have evidence. You have data.
Right.
Okay. And so
But data is
even
good. Data is necessary because
the
data can lead
PG
you.
by definition, the PG film is data. I mean, to me, I look at it and say, I believe that thing's real. But does the PG film prove it? To some people in their mind, it does. To some people, it doesn't. But because there is no definitive way to push everybody to the right side, technically it's kind of data, isn't it? You're going to look at that data and say, that's enough to support my belief, what I'm seeing and what I'm analyzing, and other people are
Yeah.
looking at that data and coming up with a different result.
Right.
But no, I'm looking forward to that conversation. I think it'll be a great one. Because, like I say, we'll
I
talk
think it will
about the
too.
data versus evidence, but then we're going to talk about how some of this landscape is changing a little bit with AI, some of the which is moving at lightning liquid speed in the advancement of that technology. Multiple corporations. It's almost like the 1960s race to the moon, right? I mean, we've got multiple corporations that are in a race to advance the technology of AI. We see it used in apps and pictures right now, but how it will be portrayed in video and the ability to write metadata that appears to be real. And so basically what I'm saying is you could go out and recreate the PG film at some point, if not now, very soon, using AI.
Mm-hmm.
And you could even make it turn around and flip you the bird at the end. You
Or
could
blow you a kiss.
metadata that you cannot determine is not the real metadata. So, when we start looking at data versus evidence, it's going to get really hard to be saying this is evidence that
Right.
proves anything. I
Yeah.
mean, this is going to get very, very difficult for
Yeah.
people to decipher reality
Right.
from
But you
something
got a
that,
pretty good panel lined up, out of
yeah,
at least three of the people in there, I could say can probably make, give some really good insights onto the answers to these questions. And that's Thomas and Leon and Steve, with his
well,
investigation. So,
and that's the thing is, with the conversations that I've had about this subject with other people in our community, other people that I consider to have some experience to talk about it intelligently. Some people will say, "Well, we can't do that right now. That doesn't exist right now." The problem is this is moving so quickly that give it 30 days, give it 90 days. This, like I say, this is a race to the moon with this subject, and you will be blown away at what the capability will end up being. And it's just going to get real, real hard to decipher
yeah,
reality and something that's artificial. But like you say, I'm really looking forward to hearing the opinions and the insight from everybody else on maybe how it will affect not only our community but every community.
yeah,
Any subject. I
yeah,
used the example the other day. You could have a car that does 12 seconds in the quarter mile, and it's never done 11 seconds in its life. And through AI, in about 45 seconds, make a video of your car doing 10 and a half seconds in the quarter mile
yeah,
and write metadata that makes it look like you recorded that for real at that location.
yeah,
And you show it to somebody, how are they able to determine that's not real, right? That like you made that up. They don't know that, and they can't prove that it's not real.
right.
That's the just an example of what we'll be looking at when you start putting the face of our community and the things that we deal with on it. It's going to get hard.
Yeah.
But anyways, Joe, I appreciate you joining us tonight. I
Yeah,
know
that's
you're going
fun.
to pop over to Steve Cole's over at the Squatch Detective. I'm going to watch his show too.
Yeah, he's got something new coming up that's a follow up from his last two videos.
Yeah,
So
I would encourage everybody to check
I'm
that out.
interested.
We've had him on as a guest a few times. He's going to be on our panel next week. Steve Coles, the Squatch Detective. I love his insight. I love the fact that he has such an investigative background.
In fact, I'm going to pop over there, man. So
Yeah, you bet. We'll see you later, Joe. That he just brings so much to a conversation when it comes to analyzing something. And so I think you guys will all appreciate that. But I want to thank everybody who took the time to join us tonight. I know it was a little different not being on live on YouTube. That'll all change next week. We'll be back on there. This show will actually go back to our YouTube library and be uploaded to it here in a couple of days. It'll later on midnight tonight or so, it'll be landing on all the podcast platforms that we normally broadcast to. But for those of you who joined us here in Facebook, I'd want to say thank you so much, and we will see you next week.